Of course, we all want financial security, but I think emotional security is almost even more necessary. When you have that, I think you have everything.
In the golden age of Hollywood, few women commanded the screen with the same intensity as Joan Crawford. Her presence was powerful, her ambition unmistakable, and her image carefully controlled. To the world, she seemed unbreakable, always composed, always in control. But behind the glamour, her personal life followed a quieter, more complicated path. She loved deeply. She married more than once. And time after time, something slipped away. Yet in her later years, one truth remained. Among all the men she had known, there was one she never truly forgot. Before we begin, tell me, what is your favorite Joan Crawford film? The Marriage That Looked Like a Dream, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. In 1929, as Hollywood was still shaping its legends, Joan Crawford entered a marriage that seemed destined for greatness. She wed Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the son of one of the industry's most respected icons. To the public, it looked like a perfect union. Two young stars, admired and elegant, stepping into a future filled with promise. But beneath that polished image, the foundation was far more fragile. Douglas had been raised in privilege. Surrounded by refinement and expectation, Joan had fought her way into Hollywood, building her success through relentless discipline and ambition. Those differences shaped not only who they were, but how they saw the world. Joan moved forward with intensity, always working, always striving for more. Douglas preferred a quieter life, one rooted in tradition and ease. At first, those differences felt manageable, almost complementary. Over time, they became impossible to ignore. Their marriage began to reflect two separate paths rather than a shared journey. Joan's rising career demanded her full attention, while Douglas struggled to understand the drive that pushed her forward. What had once felt like admiration slowly turned into distance. The world still saw glamour, but behind closed doors, something was shifting. There were whispers in Hollywood, subtle unspoken observations that their relationship was not as strong as it appeared. The connection that had once felt promising began to feel strained, stretched between two very different lives. By 1933, just 4 years after it began, the marriage came to an end. What looked like a dream from the outside revealed something far more human underneath. Two people can care for one another deeply and still find themselves unable to build a life together. For Joan Crawford, it was not just an ending. It was the beginning of a pattern she had yet to fully understand. The love that sparked a Hollywood rivalry. By the mid-1930s, Joan Crawford was no longer chasing success. She had become it. Her name carried weight, her performances drew audiences, and her presence commanded attention. Yet behind that growing power, her personal life remained unsettled, still searching for something steady and real. She believed she had found it in Franchot Tone. Tone was not just another leading man. He was classically trained, thoughtful, and widely respected for his work, including his performance in Dangerous, 1935. Joan admired more than his charm. She respected his discipline, his intelligence, and the way he carried himself both on and off screen. Their connection felt genuine, but it did not exist without complication. Bette Davis had also developed feelings for Tone, and what followed was not a dramatic confrontation, but a quiet tension that would grow into one of Hollywood's most famous rivalries. The emotions were real, but so were the ambitions surrounding them. Joan, as she often did, moved forward with certainty. In 1935, she married Tone, believing she had found a partner who could meet her on equal ground, emotionally and intellectually. For a time, that belief felt justified. They shared conversations that went deeper than surface-level Hollywood charm. There was substance between them, but intensity can be difficult to sustain. Tone struggled with personal challenges, including alcoholism, and the balance of the relationship began to shift. The steadiness Joan had hoped for slowly gave way to tension, to moments that felt harder to repair. The connection remained, but it weakened. And beneath it all, the quiet rivalry with Bette Davis never fully disappeared, adding another layer of strain to an already fragile foundation. By 1939, the marriage had come to an end. Some relationships begin with deep understanding and slowly reveal how difficult it is to hold that understanding together. The marriage that slowly fell apart. Franchot Tone. By the time Joan Crawford's marriage to Franchot Tone began to unravel, the change was not sudden. It came quietly, in moments that were easy to overlook at first, but impossible to ignore over time. There had been real hope in the beginning. Tone's intelligence and calm presence had offered something Joan believed could last. But stability requires consistency, and that became harder to hold on to. Tone's struggles with alcohol introduced a sense of unpredictability into their lives. For Joan, who had spent years building control over every part of her world, that uncertainty felt deeply unsettling. She had worked too hard to create stability to now live without it. She tried to hold the marriage together. But there is a quiet weight that builds when one person begins carrying more than the other. Joan adjusted, endured, and continued forward, hoping the balance would return. Instead, the distance grew. Outside their home, nothing seemed different. Hollywood continued to celebrate her success. Appearances were maintained. The image remained intact. Inside, something was slipping. Conversations became shorter. Understanding became more difficult. What once felt like partnership slowly turned into separation. And then, almost without a single defining moment, the end arrived. By 1939, the marriage was over. Not with drama, but with certainty. And by this point in her life, something had quietly changed. Joan Crawford was no longer just searching for love. She was beginning to understand how easily it could fade, even when it once felt real. The relationship that felt quiet, but empty. Phillip Terry. After the emotional weight of her marriage to Franchot Tone, Joan Crawford did not rush back into intensity. By the early 1940s, she had already experienced how powerful love could feel, and how quietly it could fall apart. This time, whether by choice or instinct, she moved toward something calmer. In 1942, she married Phillip Terry. There were no headlines filled with rivalry, no emotional storms surrounding their relationship. Compared to her past, it felt almost peaceful. Terry was steady, reserved, and far removed from the intensity that had defined her earlier marriages. At first, that difference brought a sense of relief. Life felt quieter, more controlled. But over time, something else began to surface. There was no strong emotional connection between them, no deep bond that anchored the relationship. They shared a life, but not a feeling. Conversations remained on the surface. The spark Joan had once known, the kind that made a relationship feel alive, was simply not there. They existed side by side, but not truly together. There were no dramatic arguments, no defining moment that shattered everything. Instead, the relationship slowly lost its meaning, fading into something that felt more like routine than love. By 1946, the marriage came to an end. It was one of the quietest chapters of her romantic life, and yet one of the most revealing. Because by this point, Joan Crawford had experienced both extremes, intensity that burned too quickly, and calm that never truly began. And neither had given her what she was searching for. Sometimes, the absence of conflict does not mean peace. It simply means something important is missing. The affairs that never turned into love. By the mid-1940s, Joan Crawford had already lived through love, marriage, and disappointment more than once. And yet, something within her remained open, still searching, still hoping that somewhere, something real might finally last. During this time, her name became linked with some of Hollywood's most powerful men. With Clark Gable, there was something unmistakable. Their connection carried an energy that felt effortless, both on screen and beyond it. When they appeared together, there was a natural chemistry that audiences could sense without explanation. Off-screen, that connection seemed to continue, quietly, without confirmation, but impossible to ignore. For Joan, it was different from what she had known before. Not stability, but something deeper. Many would later believe that if there was one man who represented true passion in her life, it was Gable. There was an emotional intensity between them that felt genuine, even if it was never meant to become something permanent. Spencer Tracy brought a different kind of presence, grounded, thoughtful, and emotionally complex. Their rumored connection was brief, but it added another layer to Joan's understanding of relationships. Yet none of these connections lasted. They were shaped by timing, circumstance, and the unspoken boundaries of Hollywood. They offered closeness, attraction, and moments of meaning, but not the foundation Joan had been searching for. A pattern had begun to reveal itself. Strong beginnings, uncertain endings. She was drawn to men who matched her strength, but those same qualities often made lasting connection difficult. Passion can be powerful, but it does not always stay. The man who changed her life forever, Alfred Steele. By the mid-1950s, Joan Crawford was no longer searching for intensity in the way she once had. The years had taught her something quietly but clearly. Passion could be powerful, but it did not always last. What she longed for now was something different: peace. It was during this more reflective chapter of her life that Alfred Steele entered her world. Unlike the men who had come before him, Steele was not part of Hollywood. He was a businessman, the chairman of Pepsi Cola, disciplined, grounded, and far removed from the emotional unpredictability Joan had known for so long. And that difference mattered. With Steele, there was no need to compete, no pressure to perform, no sense of instability waiting beneath the surface. Their connection was not built on intensity, but on something steadier: respect, trust, understanding. In 1955, they married. For the first time in years, Joan's life began to feel different. She stepped outside the rhythm of Hollywood and embraced a new role within Steele's world, even becoming involved in the corporate life of Pepsi. It was a shift that surprised many, but for Joan, it felt natural. She was no longer chasing something just out of reach. She had found something she could hold on to. Friends began to notice the change. There was a calmness in her, a sense of balance that had rarely been present before. The emotional highs and lows that once defined her relationships had softened into something more stable. And perhaps that was the difference. If Clark Gable had been the great passion of her life, Alfred Steele became the man who gave her something she had never truly known: a lasting sense of peace. The love she carried until the end. Alfred Steele. As the years passed, Joan Crawford's life began to move at a quieter pace. The intensity of Hollywood, the premieres, the attention, the constant pressure, gradually softened into something more reflective. She had lived through ambition, success, and a series of relationships that had each shaped her in different ways. But now, one connection stood apart. Her marriage to Alfred Steele had given her something she had spent years searching for. Not excitement, not intensity, but stability. With him, there was no performance required, no expectation to maintain an image. What they shared was grounded, steady, and real. And then, in 1959, that chapter came to an end. Alfred Steele passed away suddenly. The loss was profound. For Joan, it was more than the end of a marriage. It was the loss of the one relationship that had finally brought her a sense of balance. Those who knew her during this time often spoke of a quiet change. She remained strong, as she always had, but something softer had been taken away. She continued forward. She returned to her work, maintained her presence, and carried herself with the same discipline that had defined her life. But beneath that strength, something remained. A memory. In the years that followed, she never remarried. The relationships that once filled her life no longer appeared in the same way. What stayed instead was something quieter, something deeply personal. Alfred Steele became the love that endured beyond time. Not loud, not dramatic, but lasting. And when Joan Crawford reached the final years of her life, it was not the fleeting romances or the powerful attractions that defined her story. It was the quiet love that had once given her peace and never truly left her. The life of Joan Crawford reminds us that even the strongest lives carry quiet longings beneath the surface. Behind the ambition, the control, and the unforgettable performances was a woman searching for something simple and lasting, a love that could feel like home. Perhaps, in your own life, you have known a love like that too. Not the loudest one, not the most dramatic, but the one that stayed with you, even as everything else changed. And maybe that is the truth her story leaves behind. Passion may define a moment, but peace is what defines a lifetime. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. There are many more waiting to be remembered.